गणानानं त्वा गणपतिं हवामहे कविं कवीं न उपमश्रमश्रवम् ज्येष्ठराज्यं ब्रह्मणां ब्रह्मणस्पद आनशृण्वन्नो विश्चेषदा सादनम् ॐ गं गणपतये नमः हरिः ॐ श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः हरिः ॐ
Thank you very much. So, I think last time we decided that, the first 20 minutes, half an hour, we can spend time about discussing some of the ideas which we talked about last time. And specifically, if you've got any questions which you want to answer, we can put it on the floor and see what comes out of it. So, shall we start with the questions? Yes, Ashokji?
Hari Om, Rameshji, are you going to talk about the assignment and the readings? Because those books are not available. One book doesn't seem to be available on Amazon. So
Right.
I'm just trying to find where to get the books.
Okay. So the assignment is really part and parcel of this continuous assessment. And what we do here is that, as we are following the same schedule and everything else, is that every module there is going to be an assignment. And that assignment is going to be related to whatever we are going to be doing in the first module. Now I think this module, let's see where she has posted it.
Yeah, it's been posted to finish in 1 week.
Finish in 1 week, yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I am going to give you some more time because I think 1 week is not going to be enough for you. And the instructions actually are, the paper writing guidelines are there. So you need the title of your file in the format, etc. All this is kind of given. And the first choice is to review essay on the core principles of Indian psychology. Now that paper should be available on your classroom as well. Has anybody got a problem with seeing that paper, Core Principles of Indian Psychology?
Yeah, I was able to download the first paper.
Yeah. Okay, that's good.
Through ResearchGate. It worked through ResearchGate.
Oh, it worked through ResearchGate. Okay, fine. Because I had the individual essays are not, the papers are not loaded onto the classroom, I think.
No.
Did I do that last time?
No,
I googled the name of the paper and got it downloaded through ResearchGate.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, that's why I was asking, because these papers are not, I mean, if you have to search for it, we can do that, but I just wanted to make sure that.
Yeah, okay.
I can post it in WhatsApp if people want.
Yeah, if you can post the link, or if you can post the paper, that will be
the PDF.
Great. A PDF, that will be great for, okay.
Okay.
Can you post it in the Google Classroom? Because WhatsApp is only on my phone.
Sure.
Yeah, me too.
Sure.
Okay.
I can do that.
Okay, so the thing is that, the readings which I'm talking about here actually have got all those PDFs which are supposed to be available at the same time. So this introduction to Indian philosophy, there is also a PDF for that as well. So I don't know why it has not turned up, because I think Vilasini might not have put it on. But what I can do, I'm going to put it on because...
Those PDFs are available.
They are posted.
I didn't see them.
I can't
check in the upload of the PowerPoint. For the previous class, there are about 6 documents there. They're all uploaded there.
Where is it? I'm sorry, I'm not.
Yeah, I could not find.
Okay, if you go to my first posting of the PPT file, in the same one, you can see all the other papers which I've uploaded.
But where is the first posting? Because
Oh, it's in the Chinfo.
Yes,
Ah,
I found it.
It's
Okay.
okay, Chinfo Classroom.
Chinfo Classroom, and there
I am
do.
here. I could not see them.
Yeah, I
I
can't
did.
see it.
Okay, who can
Google
see? Who can
Classroom.
see it? Can you guide somebody to tell them? Because I
Or can
can't.
someone share a screen and just show us where it is?
Yeah, because I don't even see the PowerPoints.
Exactly.
So if you allow me to
Okay.
share screen.
Hariom, they're in the Google classrooms. They're not
Okay,
in
there you are. These are the ones, right? You can see PPT module part up to 21, and then reading 1, reading 2, Indian journey.
Yeah.
All this material is already given to you.
But
Oh,
in my Google Classroom, I can't see. I can only see PPT 1.
yeah, that's
click on
that's
that.
what I'm seeing.
No,
PPT.
click on that, you see the others.
Yeah, you click on that, you'll see everything.
So I sent you.
everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
I sent the link for this the posting. I don't know if that works for anyone.
No, it's just that somebody needs to click that link and then you see all the 6 documents.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, everybody clear about that?
Yeah.
Not really.
Not really.
So-
Okay, tell me what it is.
Okay. Still trying to find module
Classwork.
1.
Do you want me to share the screen, Nandaji?
Yes, please.
From the-
Yes.
Okay.
From the
okay.
classwork.
Yeah,
So
please.
it's under classwork.
Classwork. Okay.
Okay, so I'm just going to Indian psychology. So you have this screen, Nandaji and Mitaji.
Yeah.
So you press this, and then there is this link PPT module. If you click that, it says PPT module 1. You just click that, it opens up all these.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Got it. Got it. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody got it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and the idea is for you to kind of reflect on this thing, and plus, if you would like to kind of do any further research and follow some of the papers which are in the published paper, you can do that as well. You need to write about 800 to 1,000 words, which is about 4 or 5 pages.
So even if we don't get the books, as long as we do these readings and
Yeah, that's right. Don't worry about the books now, because all the material required for the assignment is actually available on the classroom.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And so Rameshji, when do you think then if you're able to extend it out, when are you thinking?
You see, the thing is that we have only come halfway down the module, so I can't expect you to kind of answer a question which is. But the first part, the first essay on the core principles, that you can do because we covered most of that one. The Indian philosophy, the booklet is there, so you'll be able to read it up and do your research and then be able to answer. The goal of these two is different. Number one, slightly different in the sense that the Indian philosophy we have kind of talked about not completely directly, but I've introduced you to the darshanas and how each one is kind of different in terms of the formulation of the spiritual knowledge, and you should be able to kind of relate that to what is available on the classroom for that assignment. The first assignment is slightly different in the sense that most of the material is there. You have to try and extend your thinking beyond that to areas which are of interest to you. Okay? So the core principles, it will talk about the main principles of Indian psychology, but then you can pick up 1 or 2 things to go into more detail. Now that will be up to you. Okay.
So the due date, you said wouldn't be a week away.
Yeah,
so
I will change the due date to not next Friday, but maybe give you a few more days. How many days
Days
do you
or
think?
weeks?
Yeah. How many days do you think you might require? Don't
Maybe
tell
a
me
couple
1
of
year.
weeks, maybe 2 weeks, Rameshji.
2 weeks? Is
Yeah,
everybody
Maybe the following weekend.
yeah, maybe the
okay?
following weekend would be better.
Better
Okay.
get it done.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's not that
Okay.
much. It's not such a long paper.
not just a
No,
lot, but we have to
no,
wrap
it's
our
not
minds
long.
around it
It's
and
not
think
long.
about it.
But I would advise you not to use a ChatGPT because that you can do in few seconds.
That's why we need 2 weeks.
Okay. So, right. So, I mean, if there's any further questions about it, please do let me know. Then I can try to answer the questions about the assignment. But as soon as we finish this first part of this tonight's session, I will change the date on the assignment so that everybody is aware. Okay, so coming back to questions, I requested you to kind of make a list of all your questions so that we can start immediately.
Hari Om Patniji.
Hari Om.
Since the Navratri is coming up, it's going to be a bit tight with the festivities and everything. So if you can extend it maybe a week after Navratri, it would be really helpful.
Okay. The week after Navratri is what date now? What date are
19,
we-
October
Yes.
19.
19th. Okay. So if we go from the 5th to the 12th to the 19th, that will be 3 weeks. I think that might be taking it a bit too far, further than what I would have expected. Okay, I think if most of you are comfortable with the 12th, let's stick to 12th, but if you have got any kind of work or any professional personal things which are going to not let you allow it, then you write to me officially so that I can include that in my what you call diary, so that I know that you'll be submitting a bit later. I'm not very worried about the dates of the assignment. I only want you to focus and do a good assignment because it'll count eventually towards your marking of the course. So if everybody kind of agrees, except those who have got other issues like Navratri and so on, if we all agree on the 12th, then if there are exceptional cases where you want more time, then please write to me, and then I can confirm that you can submit by that date. Okay? But don't let everybody start saying, I want 19th and then going further to 26th and so on. Okay, shall we now think about the questions? Or shall I put up the
Yeah,
slides
Rameshji,
maybe?
I have a question. If no one else has, I had a question. I was going through all the readings. We talk about psychology, but if you go to a hospital or something and you're working with patients who have problems, you usually have, at least in the US system, you have a social worker who is more tuned with the community, who knows community resources, who approaches it more societal than psychological, so to speak. So would it be fair to say, I think someone has their...
somebody has got their mic on. Okay, thank you.
So
yes.
Would it be fair to say that Indian psychology is more sort of Indian social psychology or sociology, somewhere in the social work realm, than more in the psychological realm, or is there really no difference?
You see, social psychology is the study of social influence on behavior. So there is somebody called Kurt Lewin who talks about social psychology, and he says that, you know, behavior is equal to person plus social situation. So in other words, that the person is affected by the social situation, and how they behave is according to that social situation. Now, there are overlaps in terms of what I'm teaching in terms of Indian psychology and the influences which are there in terms of you being located in a certain social situation. Now, for example, if we think about, you know, the personality and the person, the jiva, and the prakriti of the jiva, and if we think about the guna model of the personality, then that guna model is based on the prakriti. Prakriti is equal to sattva, rajas, and tamas. Okay, so in other words, that my mind and body are made of matter, prakriti. They are going to be affected by the gunas. The outside environment is also prakriti, and therefore there is a connection, direct and indirect, between myself and the world around me through the guna and through the prakriti connection. But at the same time, you know, the social situation can be seen as anything which you are located in terms of a social context, and that is going to affect you in terms of your mind, thinking, beliefs, intentions, and behavior. So Indian psychology also talks about that. So for example, when we talk about Karma Yoga is a contextual, situational approach to carrying out your actions. So whenever you're carrying out action, you are contextualizing what you need to do as your dharma according to the situation. So that in that way, situation will affect how you respond to the situation in terms of not only your vasana operating system, but also a dharma operating system, because then it becomes a contextual behavior according to your environment. So I think, you know, it is that we are not separating out social Indian psychology, I mean Indian social psychology and Indian psychology. I think these are overlapping to a large extent, and therefore, you know, it makes sense to just keep it as Indian psychology. Now, in reference to what you are saying about social workers and everything else, right? So social workers have got a certain function. I don't know what their function is in the US, but maybe somebody can tell us as to, you know, if they're working with social workers, what kind of things. I know what they do in the UK anyway, but in the US it will be probably be different.
At least the way we've been handling it with a group in San Diego, our approach as a Hindu chaplain, what I consider myself, is kind of between the full-fledged psychologist, psychiatrist who's there in the
That's right.
hospital versus, let's say, the Purohit who would do elaborate ceremonies and all that. So we're kind of in between, and so I think our role is kind of overlaps the
Both of
social
them.
worker, but the
Yeah.
social, the pure social worker, the one who is assigned in the hospital as a social worker, is someone who will look at the person's, let's say, the economic situation. Let's say the patient is in hospital and then there is two kids who are in the house, nobody to take care of that. Okay, so they look at it from that perspective.
That's right, from the social situation.
From the
right?
social
So,
situation.
yes.
But ours
So-
kind of overlaps everything.
It will overlap. So, say, so for example, you know, if you come across a patient, say a Hindu patient, right? And you are saying, okay, you know, your family is just sitting here. Then you want to kind of see if there is any interactions which are going on, which you need to kind of look at and perceive and think about and say, you know, is there any support from your family? I don't see anybody coming to visit you, for example. And therefore, the implication of that is that the patient and the extension of the patient to the family is also going to be important. And I've got, you know, when I was doing the supervision last year for the senior students, you know, we had a couple of examples of that as well. Is that, you know, somebody was just there for days and days without anybody visiting. And then, you know, the chaplain wanted to find out, is there anything which I can do to help you to, you know, connect you with your family? And that became another kind of extension of their work, because then to talk to the family and see if there is anything which can be done in terms of your role as a chaplain. So there are going to be overlaps between all these things, right? So when you're in the overlap, which means you will be talking to the social psychologists, you'll be talking to the psychologists, you may even be talking to the pandit, and you are the kind of go-between all these different connections of the patient. It may not be emphasized in any particular way as a kind of very directive way of functioning, but it means that those strands of your work needs to be taken care of, and particularly within the local Hindu community, you have to make inroads into and connection with the local Hindu community, so that if there is any support required for the patient in terms of the community support, that then also can be considered. That is how it would work in the UK. Maybe slight differences here and there, but the concept and the principle, I think, is probably the same. So, Ashokji, does it make any sense to you?
Thank you, Ramesh ji. Thank you, Nanda ji. Yeah, so the gist of what you're saying is that elements of Indian psychology permeate what are the fields of social psychology or social work, but that's one part of it. It's more holistic. The Western science is more fragmented here. It takes sort of a more holistic attitude.
Yes, and the whole, as I think we talked about the 4 dimensions, right? The physical, the personal, psychological, the relational in terms of the relations of the person, and then finally the spiritual work. So, I mean, as a spiritual care worker, your emphasis is mainly on the spiritual side of things, but it never works like that, right? So we will go into the room and the patient will start talking about something else altogether, which is not related to spirituality, but it may be very much relational, or it could be personal, or it could be even physical. Obviously, if they are in the hospital, right, they are going to be having some physical issues as well. So, it's likely to be interconnected, and you kind of judge whether, where the direction of your intervention is going to be. And sometimes, you can't intervene on behalf of the patient, and because of the kind of rules which we talked about, the rules of ethic and confidentiality, etc. Okay.
Thank you, Ramesh.
Thank you. Any other question? Please do ask many questions, because then I get very satisfied that you are asking questions.
So in that case, let me raise one thing which I'm sure is going to come later.
Yeah.
See, I was struck by the term Indian psychology versus indigenous psychology.
Right.
So, so I think it kind of touches what Ashokji said also. Okay, so what am I doing different from what another chaplain would do or something? Because I'm coming from the Hindu perspective. So it's 2 things. There is that aspect of me orienting myself constantly against, okay, my goal in life is the supreme realization. So I'm looking at it in a different way. That's true. But I'm also looking at it from the perspective of somebody who grew up in India with that cultural thing, and who's of course transplanted here, and of course their kids have a little bit of mom and dad in them, but they have a lot of the US thing in them. So I'm looking at both factors. Ashokji perhaps meant that, right? So you're looking at it in 2 different. I'll let Rameshji.
Right. So yes, I mean, the what you mentioned about indigenous and Indian, I guess, sometimes we use them synonymous, in the sense they kind of refer to the same thing, which is something which is indigenously originating as a psychological, thought and practice. So I guess, that is what it is. But on the other hand, suppose now, I come across people who are requiring, spiritual care. but they have been brought up in the UK, and perhaps they have kind of moved away from that cultural dimension or the religious, spiritual dimension, and they are kind of not only, a bit further away from the core of their cultural identity, but also that, they are not familiar with many of the things. Now, how do you kind of deal with that kind of person, and how do you deal with somebody who's deeply embedded and knows, the culture and the spiritual aspects of it? So you will see a spectrum of different patients, right? Not only Hindu patient, but also other background people, patients. Then you have to kind of adjust your way of dealing with them, and so on and so on. But primarily your approach is from the Hindu perspective. And sometimes I've seen that, people adapt the Hindu thought process and the Hindu concept and idea to suit anybody, because sometimes it's a very universal approach which we have especially in Advaita Vedanta, whereby especially when we talk about, the authentic self, which is the Atman, but you don't have to talk about the Atma. You can say, your authentic self. How do you relate to that, and how do you make it to be more available to you, right? So there are ways in which you can also try to bridge the gap, as it were, between yourself and the patient in various different ways.
Very true. But what I also see a distinct population in San Diego. There is a group of people who are decidedly Vedantic. They have that approach, but they are not Indian, as in growing up in Bangalore. You know what I mean?
Sure.
It is distinctly a different stream of Vedanta. There are so it's that side too.
Yeah. You'll find all kinds of complexion in terms of their spiritual dimension, and also that we are not necessarily kind of going to stick to what you call Advaita Vedanta, because the Indian psychology will consist of all the darshanas. So if you're thinking about Sankhya and yoga, and you're thinking about Dvaita Vedanta, which has got a slightly different idea about the person and divinity. Then you got the Vishishta Advaita Vedanta, which is also going to be different by Ramanujacharya. And if you get a Swaminarayan person, for example, then what you will see is that they will be more towards that kind of devotion inclination, right? And they will be following the Ramanujacharya philosophy of you can approach God, but you are always going to be separate from God. You're part of God, but you're not God. So that again is very fundamentally different from Advaita Vedanta. And then Dvaita Vedanta says, no, we will ever remain separate. So don't tell me that you are Brahman and you're going to kind of merge with that. So sometimes those differences will be there. But these are rare cases where somebody will say, I only follow this tradition. Strictly following, say, the Swaminarayan or the Gaudiya Vaishnava philosophy. The basic thing to remember is that be prepared for any kind of patient to come in front of you, right? And therefore how to deal with it through experience and through your development of your expertise, you begin to learn how to do that.
Thank you.
Good question. Okay. I will start with Param, who is on my left-hand screen.
Hari Om. The way I'm sort of, in the last few classes I'm looking at this is this more for self-care, for the spiritual care provided, how you set up this Indian psychology? Because when we are going to teach or when you're going to take care of people, they may have a different concept altogether, and we cannot put our judgment on them. But this is what I've seen so far is I look at this as to help myself be a better person. That's from my perspective. Is that the right way to look at it?
Yeah. So there are three dimensions to this thing. One is that how does this knowledge help you as a person? Yes. And therefore, this knowledge, if I have this knowledge, somehow or the other, it will begin to help me in terms of my own quality and my own personal development. That's number one. Number two is that, it has to do with the client. Is that how is it going to help the patient? So this knowledge, how can I deliver it to the patient in a way in which it is going to help the patient? So on the one hand, it's about myself and my own, kind of spiritual development and the qualities I can develop through that. But on the other hand, it is also about the client and how this knowledge can help them. The third dimension is also that the relationship between me and the patient, me as a spiritual care worker and the patient, that particular relationship is also going to be affected by this knowledge. Yes? Because, for example, if you think about, Bhakti Yoga. Now, one of the components of Bhakti Yoga is that there is going to be a compassionate relationship with that person. Okay. Now, that compassionate, relationship is based on the idea that I see God in everybody, and therefore, this person who is suffering, I have that compassion because that is not only related to them as being divine as well, but also a suffering jiva. So that kind of thinking will come in terms of the third dimension, which is my relationship to the patient. So all these three things can be supported by this knowledge. Okay, and therefore we have to think, well, how is it going to help the patient? The knowledge which I got in Indian psychology, does it necessarily going to help them? Yes, on the one hand, it is about, the practices which are there in terms of Indian psychology. Okay, so there is a kind of overlap between spirituality, Vedanta as a subject of Vedanta, and the sadhanas which are related to Vedanta. But on the other hand, there is also the psychological dimension of those practices as well. Okay? So, for example, if I say, Sat Sampati, Samadama Uparati Titiksha Shraddha Samadhan, 6 kind of tools in your toolkit, which you can say, okay, just kind of close your eyes. I want you to just focus inwards and just see what is going on in your mind and focus on the pain which you are feeling now or whatever it is. That is a way in which I can tell the patient to use that technique of Uparati in order for them to kind of have this mindfulness approach to their pain and their inner suffering. So you see what I'm saying is that there are tools which are there, which can be used for the patient, can be used for yourself as well. Is that sometimes if you're feeling stressed, that same tool is going to help you as well for your own self-care. Okay, and using this kind of tools with the patient will also allow that relationship to also be kind of established in that way. Is that okay?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. We have got now the next one is Bindeshwar.
Sir, where there is a distinction between psychological studies or the psychological knowledge and the spiritual knowledge, because I see it is in the Indian psychology, it's totally dominated by your, this is its beauty, the spiritual aspect. So where we find it, and it in our countries, this spiritual study is mainly dominated by the saints, acharyas.
Okay. So, anybody would like to comment on that? What do you think?
Can you repeat your question, because I don't know.
Yes.
I totally understood. Yeah.
Yes, I can repeat the question. Where is the distinction between psychology and spirituality? In other words, the distinction between the psychological knowledge and the spiritual knowledge.
I don't see a distinction. This is
I see here once I was reading the Indian psychology, I find this that the major component is a spiritual component.
Okay. Have you been attending these classes? Have you been attending these classes from the beginning?
No, sir. Earlier I missed, but I saw the lecture.
Okay,
I
so
saw
what
the
I
PowerPoint,
suggest,
yes.
yeah, so I think maybe somebody else can explain why spirituality and Indian psychology are together. And what is, the question is, what is the source material of Indian psychology, right? Where does Indian psychology come from? Anybody tell me, where does it come from?
Our scriptures.
That's right. So if the psychology is based on the scriptures, there is bound to be that spiritual connection, okay, in Indian psychology. So that's why there is a big difference between Western psychology and Indian psychology. Western psychology is based on empirical methods and the scientific method, which do the experimentation and derive their knowledge from there. We use the source of our scriptures as the basis of our understanding the psychological dimension of the individual. Okay? So, for example, in the Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, he talks about the chitta, and the chitta is the mind. And the chitta has got several layers he talks about. Now, Patanjali's Yoga Sutra is a scripture, right? It is part of our scriptural text. But it has got a lot of psychological content because it talks about the mind, it talks about the unconscious mind, it talks about the different states of the mind, it talks about the dimensions of experience of the mind, and so on and so on. Now, where did I get all this? What are the 5 states of the mind? What are the 5 kleshas? What are the 5 different types of modifications of the mind? That is coming from Mr. Patanjali. It's not coming from anybody else. And therefore, that scripture is the basis of Indian psychology, and therefore you can't separate them out. They are going to be 100% connected. Okay? Good. Anybody else? Any other question? Last one.
I have a question, Rameshji sir.
Yes, yes.
So, like Indian psychology, and I have care seekers who are not only Indians, like all across, right?
Yes,
So soldiers.
yes, yes.
And if I want to talk about, like they'll say, why is it happening to me? Why is this happening to me? So, and if I talk about, your past life, rebirth, that's the moment they will dismiss me.
Yeah.
So, so how to convey that, you don't deserve this, but it has happened to you, and we have to take day by day, all those things without going into the details that, okay, it might be your past karma or something which you haven't done or something.
Yeah. No, absolutely right. And you can't talk to somebody in that kind of manner, because if they have got no background, or if they are from a completely different background, they might find it even offensive.
They literally look at me like that crazy lady.
Yeah.
She's gonna start talking about the craziness. And then she'll start talking about the elephant god and all this. So it gets a little tricky over there.
Yeah. So how I would put it is that, you have got this particular condition at this point in your life, number one. Okay. Let's not look at, the things which might have happened in your last life, or you don't even have to mention anything. All I will say is let's focus on the present moment and the present condition, because this is where the difference is going to come from. So I'm not going to explain why is this coming, and what have I done to deserve this. There is no real answer to that question for somebody who is not familiar with the law of karma. Okay? So which means I have to shift my attention from the law of karma to the immediate present and say, let's look at your situation now and see how you can do the best to deal with it or to manage it in the best way possible. So now I've not only kind of shifted the attention away from all this crazy language, like you say, which they might think that, talking about crazy things like past karma and past lives, that we don't want to talk about. But we can focus on the present moment. And let's do that and see what can be done now instead of worrying about where it came from. Okay? That's one approach which I've used myself sometimes as well.
But Rameshji, now every faith tradition has its own explanation. Islam says God is testing you. Others say you need to have faith. God has a plan for you, or whatever it is. So by saying let's focus on the present, if they are half a faith tradition which has some sort of explanation, whether, I mean, it's never complete, shouldn't we as counselors try to say, okay, what does your faith tradition tell you? You are a Christian. What does your Christian theology say? Why this happens to you?
So Ashok, that is right. And as I was saying, that is one approach to focus on the present. But there are other approaches as well. Is that, like, for example, I can kind of say, okay, why am I suffering? Why am I suffering? This patient is telling me. So I would ask, another approach is to kind of explore that idea of why me. And then when I kind of question the patient about what do you think how do you yourself explain what has happened to you? Okay? And there could be many dimensions. So if the person is totally agnostic or does not believe in God, then it becomes a different approach. If it is a person from the Hindu tradition, that is a different approach. If the person is from the Christian background and Christian faith, then the approach might change as well. So that I will question the person themselves because they know more about their religion than I do. And therefore, questioning them, we can collaboratively work together to see and to examine the various aspects of that particular dilemma, and then to come up with some kind of solution. Okay? Under the guidance of both of us kind of working together and creating a solution from their experience, their background, their faith, we can probably work something out. Okay? And this applies to even when I do my counseling and they ask me a similar question, my immediate reaction is that, okay, where is this question actually coming from? Why are you asking this question and what this question means to you in terms of your present condition? So we will explore all that in terms of what is happening now, so that we begin to understand the context of their background, their religion, their faith, and say okay, how can we connect it together? And what is it that making you not to connect to your faith in this way, whereby you are getting support from that faith, rather you're questioning your faith itself. So it can lead to many different kind of exploration. Is that what is making you to be less trustful of that tradition which you're following? So that why am I being punished, for example, right? So this kind of exploration with the patient can sometimes clarify some of these issues for the patient then to think about how can I relate to what we are talking about. So that would be another approach which we can take. Okay. So I don't know if it answers your question, Poonam, but certainly it can be quite contextual and specific related to the patient.
No, definitely it did answer my question. It's just that I so believe in the rebirth and the cycle of life that it's kind of it comes very naturally, even though I'm trying to get away from that and seeing who my clientele is. It is the belief kind of comes out, and I have to be very cognizant of what who's sitting next to me.
That's right. So that's why I say many times is that even in psychotherapy and counseling, the person comes first. Okay, we have to kind of bracket out all of our ideas and all of our biases and all of our understanding and start with the patient themselves. And see where the patient is in terms of their worldview, their kind of distress which they are having at the moment, and how they make these connections themselves. And that becomes a starting point for us then to kind of connect with them and say, okay, let's work together to work out how this can be kind of meaningful for you in terms of your own faith. Okay? So it's much less about being directive and saying, you have to do this. It's about how can I help you to think through and find your own solution. That normally would be the approach.
Right.
Okay. Nishan?
Hari Om. I completely agree with you, Dr. Patni. And just to add to it, I think we have to make a choice that if, let's say, we're working with a patient that's not Hindu religion, right? I'll just take a Christian example. And the person's Christian, so their belief system may be different than mine.
Yeah.
The choice I can make in my own mind as I interact with that person is, can I find the commonality that we have versus the difference? Even though I might be grounded in Vedanta and the cycle of birth and rebirth,
yes.
I can find something. For example, if the person says, oh, when I die, I go to heaven.
Yeah.
Who goes to heaven? Quite frankly, there's a commonality in my mind between I go to heaven or hell and cycle birth and rebirth, because somebody's going. So who is that? And so, I think that's a very key thing, in my opinion, is no matter how opposite to or incongruent with Hinduism, I'm there to provide care. I need to find the commonality so that I can get them on the way.
That's right. And I think that's absolutely right, is that find the common ground, look for a way of connecting with the patient, not through filters and filters of knowledge, but rather go down to the experience of the client themselves and let it flower out, blossom out from there, right? And my way of working is that I will support that whole thought process and the resolution of whatever I can help them with. But the starting point is always the patient. And then I can kind of put my, view on it from my own point of view. So I think that would be a good way of working. Okay. Right. So any more questions? We have spent about 45 minutes on this. So, but it is good. I would like you to kind of, throw these questions whenever you have. Every session we're going to have now, we'll have this kind of dialogue, because I think it's important for you to also clarify some of the doubts in your own mind and also make you a better spiritual care worker, because, the doubt going in the patient's room with confusion in the mind is not a very good idea. So whatever is confusing now, it is good to have it cleared up now. Okay, so shall we have a 10-15 minute break now before we start, or shall I start and have a break later? It's almost time for a break.
Let's have a break.
Okay, let's have a break, and then we come back after 10 minutes. So, if you remember, we were looking at the ideas about the person, right? And I think we covered several slides here. Okay, so we were talking about the holistic view of personhood. And like I was explaining the last time, is that, when we talk about the person and when we talk about the jiva, they are not necessarily the same thing, because person, according to the Western psychological point of view, is a person is made up of whatever, the constituents of this person are. And the personality of that person is somehow kind of according to the traits which are there in that person, and so on and so on. And these all are kind of measurable to see who this person is. The Western approach is that a person is made up of matter. Okay? Whereas the jiva is not only matter, but it's also consciousness. So that is a fundamental difference between a jiva and the person. And if you think about the constitution of a jiva, then not only have we got the material aspect of it, and even the mind, according to Sankhya Yoga and Vedanta, is the mind is also made of matter, but a very subtle form of matter. Now, when we talk about the subtle form of matter, it is that we are talking about something which is very fine in its pervasiveness and its what you call the fineness of that material, right? So I give you the example of the cube of ice. Now the cube of ice has got only certain dimensions which are physically available to us, and we can see it is limited within that cube. When the ice is going to melt, it will pervade a larger area because the water then will make a puddle, and that puddle will be larger than appear to be larger than the kind of space which the tube was occupying. And then when the water turns into vapor, the vapor is now occupying a much larger area. So Indian psychology and the Indian traditions talk about this subtleness or the pervasiveness as something which is equivalent. So in terms of the person then is made up of not only the gross physical body matter, but also that the mind is like a subtle form of matter which is more pervasive than the body itself. And that gives us a different picture of the person in that just one way of thinking about the constitution of a person, whether it is completely material according to Western point of view, or whether it is going to be matter plus consciousness according to the Indian psychological perspective. So now the physical dimension, not only the body, but the interaction with the environment. So remember, Ayurveda is particularly kind of conscious of this connection with the environment because for them, Ayurvedic thinking is that the Prakriti, which is me, is also the Prakriti outside. Just like we mentioned just in earlier on, there's this connection of Prakriti within and Prakriti without, so that it is all one kind of substance, just like the Western way of thinking about it. And there is an interaction with the environment through this Ayurvedic way of thinking, where it emphasizes this connection and the balance of this connection, not only within the bodily elements, but also the connection between the body and the environment, because they're made up of the same substance. So Ayurveda is particularly kind of interested in knowing how the environment, Prakriti environment, is affecting your own Prakriti in terms of the body and the mind. Then we have got the mental dimension, which is the manas, intellect, buddhi, ahankara, and subliminal mind, the chitta. Now, as I was saying that before, that the mind is kind of looked at in different darshanas differently. So Sankhya and Yoga will talk about the buddhi and the ahankara and the manas. That very same kind of idea which is there in Sankhya is then converted into Yoga as chitta. And chitta there is not the subliminal mind. Chitta is the whole contraption of the inner instrument. So there are different kind of ways in which the mental dimension is dissected, as it were, and that makes a difference. Now, these components are explored in various Indian philosophical systems such as Sankhya and Yoga, which offer insights into the working of the mind and consciousness. Okay? So, components which are the inner components, which then represents the kind of way in which mind is functioning and the relationship of the mind with consciousness. And that sometimes is slightly different, differently understood in the various different philosophical systems. And then we have got the spiritual dimension, which is then the most distinctive aspect of the personhood in Indian psychology, and the emphasis on the spiritual dimension is very much there. So that the spiritual dimension, in fact, is the context within which we start thinking even about the physical and the psychological part of it. And this concept of Atman, for example, the inner self, is central to many Indian philosophical traditions. It represents the eternal, unchanging aspect of the person, which is beyond physical and mental attributes. So now this is the distinctive part of the personhood, which we are talking about, the spiritual dimension. And that spiritual dimension is related to what we call as the Atman, your inner self, your innermost self. And that innermost self, again, we have to be slightly careful in saying that innermost self, because sometimes, it may appear there is this, a thumb length Atma hidden somewhere inside us. It's not like that. Okay, Atma is all pervading. So how can it be limited to one particular place in the body? It is not. Okay? So this kind of thinking is there in terms of the holistic view of Indian psychology. Then the fourth dimension is the social and the ethical dimension, is understood in relation to societal and ethical frameworks. So we were talking about the social dimension, and whether the social dimension is also included in thinking in Indian psychology. And I did mention that it takes into account the social dimension together with the physical and psychological and the ethical dimension as well, spiritual dimension. So concepts like dharma, duty, morality, karma, action and consequence, they kind of illustrate the way in which there is the interconnection between me as an individual, my role in the family or the wider society, and how that role is affected by what is the specification of the role in terms of what ought to be done in that role. And that points us towards the concept of dharma, because my duty as a teacher is so and so, my duty as a father is so and so, my duty as a child is so and so. So that connection between the concept of dharma, the interconnectedness with the social order, and included in that is the moral order, which is duty and morality. The morality is kind of connected with duty as well. So all these four dimensions then make up the whole jiva or the person, and the personhood we can kind of analyze in terms of these four dimensions. So, okay. Bhante, you want to ask a question?
I just wanted to understand that, Hariom, in mental dimension, we are saying that the mind is inert or material, and then there's a connection. And then we also say that the soul is doesn't have any connection, like it's self-shining. Then how could there be connection with mind and soul according to the spiritual dimension?
Okay. So that's a good question. If matter is inert, then how come we are still alive? That's one question. The other question is that, okay, if you are talking about the Atman as our true essence, and apparently it is not connected with anything. So where is the connection coming from? And I think we've talked about this before, but maybe somebody can remember what did we say about the connection between the transcendental and the transactional, and where that connection we can find.
Hariom. So we talked about the reflected consciousness.
That's right.
And
That's right.
so even though the mind is inert, we have the Atma it's similar to when we have a mirror, and the mirror is the reflecting surface. So we can look at that as our mind. And if the sun is coming and reflecting off of that surface, then we are able to see the sun, so to speak. because it's reflected. I guess the bucket of water would probably be a better example.
Yeah.
instead of a mirror.
Even
But
even
similar,
the,
yeah.
similar, exactly, similar.
Yeah, so it's the
So-
reflective
so-
consciousness.
That's
is what
right.
we-
That's right.
is what we-
So yeah, that is exactly what it is. And sometimes I use the analogy of the light in the room and the light of the sun. So the sun is not directly here in my room, but sun is reflected, as it were, as the light in the room. Okay? So sun is pervading my room with its light. So the consciousness is reflected in the mind as this illuminating factor. And that illuminating factor is nothing but awareness. So I am aware of everything because of the capacity of my mind to receive that light of Atman and then to allow it to illuminate whatever is going on in my mind. And therefore, it is like shining a torch in the dark, and that whatever is revealed by the torchlight is what I can see. So, in the same way, awareness is available to us because of Atma, and Atma is the one which is the illuminating factor, which is then entering the mind, as it were, to illumine what is going on in the mind as this indirect light of awareness. So from pure consciousness to the relative reality and awareness in my mind. So the connection is at the level of awareness. Awareness is the direct connection to the origin of that awareness, which is Atma itself. Now the other consideration we have to take is that with this reflection also comes the energy and the activation of everything which is going on in the body and the mind and the intellect. This is what Gurudev calls as the vital spark of life. Now, where is this sentiency coming from? This idea that, I am alive, the body is alive, and this sentiency, which is then what is available in terms of not only the awareness, but the force of that awareness is then translating itself as some kind of energy in the body, mind, intellect, which allows this movement to take place. And that energy is the way in which sometimes we talk about the two aspects of consciousness, is the power of existence and the power of consciousness, both of which then are pervading the mind, or maybe technically speaking, the buddhi. The buddhi is then the primary reflector of that consciousness, and it not only gives us the awareness, but also the force behind that awareness, which allows this sentiency to be experienced. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, clear, right?
Yes.
Okay. Nashat, you wanted to ask something or wanted to comment?
No, it was covered by Seemaji. Thank you.
Okay, good. Okay. So then we have got the last thing which is talking about social ethical dimension. And of course, the concept of dharma is very much centered around my dharma, my duty and responsibility in terms of the roles which I play in my life. And sometimes we see that, some of these roles get into conflict with each other. But that is fine. That is what Mahabharata talks about all the time. This kind of moral dilemmas which arise when we are trying to kind of have several roles which we need to play in our lives. Okay, so the centrality of the self and the person in Indian psychology. Okay, so we saw that the centrality of consciousness is there. Consciousness is very much at the forefront of Indian psychological thinking. And I explained the logic to you as to why that is the case. Okay? And the main thing about that to think about is consciousness is always being talked about because we have to talk about the fourth state of consciousness, which is related to moksha. Remember that the Indian tradition are talking about liberation, moksha in different ways, but at the end of the day, that moksha is about attaining a certain enlightened state. And that enlightened state is an altered state of consciousness, a transcendental state of consciousness, which then is primarily the goal of almost all the tradition and sub-traditions in the Indian philosophical traditions. So if that is the case, then consciousness is related to what? It is related to the person. And what the person is going to do in order to reach that destination of pure consciousness, therefore the person becomes another important central aspect of Indian psychology. Well, we can also say that after all, if you're going to talk about psychology, you're going to talk about the person anyway. And if you're going to talk about psychology, you're going to talk about consciousness anyway. But what happens here in Indian psychology, that is put right up front, is this is what we are going to be talking about. We are going to be talking about moksha, we're going to be talking about the altered state of consciousness, we are talking about who is that, who is going to quest for the altered state of consciousness. It is a person. And therefore centrality of the person, and the overarching concern in Indian psychology, purity, perfection, freedom, and liberation. So this liberation belongs to who? The person. So person becomes important now. And the person, in the context of their spiritual practices, are related to purity. They are related to perfection. And they are related to attaining freedom and liberation. So person again comes at the heart of Indian psychology. So the person as such is, person per se is consciousness as such. Okay, Vishal?
Hariom Patiji. So just a quick clarification. When we talk about the altered state of consciousness, Patiji, so from the Advaita perspective, when we talk about, and when we talk especially the Mandukya Upanishad, like consciousness only exists. But when we deep dive into the other philosophy, as you mentioned, Dvaita, so what is the connection? Like, is that so evident from the other Hindu tradition in terms of because there is Dvaita where God and Jiva and Jagat are different, and so is that consciousness pretty evident when we talk from the philosophical perspective?
I think it comes in one way or the other, right? So, for example, the kind of even the title which is given in Dvaita Vedanta to what you call ISKCON. Okay, ISKCON is about what? Krishna consciousness. Okay, so Dvaita Vedanta doesn't talk about Brahman in the sense that Brahman is what needs to be attained, because it doesn't believe that Brahman can be attained. Right? It talks about that we can only kind of relate to that consciousness, and that consciousness is Krishna. And therefore, Krishna consciousness becomes my main project as an ISKCON devotee. So I move nearer and nearer to Krishna through pervading my whole consciousness with Krishna and the thought of Krishna, and seva to Krishna, devotion to Krishna, all that becomes a primary way of dealing with it. But certainly it is still talking about consciousness. Okay? Yoga psychology, for example, also talks about the Kaivalya state. It has got a very systematic way of thinking about consciousness and the altered state of consciousness. So when it talks about savikalpa samadhi and nirvikalpa samadhi, these are samadhis which are altered states of consciousness. These are not normal, ordinary states of consciousness. So, for example, Patanjali starts talking about the vitarka samadhi. Now, we might think that vitarka samadhi is what we do every day. It is not. Vitarka samadhi is so much focused on something, an object, which is either internal or external, so much focused on the object that the mind actually merges with that object. The object becomes the consciousness, and the consciousness becomes the object. Very high state of focus and what you call focused attention. Now, that is an altered state of consciousness, because it doesn't belong to our ordinary ways of, concentrating on something. Because 50% of the time the concentration will go away. That is not samadhi. Samadhi is kind of continuous engagement and absorption in the object of my meditation. So again, he talks about altered states of consciousness. Vedanta, certainly Advaita Vedanta talks about that as well. Vishishta Advaita Vedanta or Ramanujacharya, it also talks about Brahman, but it says, I cannot become fully Brahman. I can be part of Brahman, but I cannot be merging with Brahman. So again, there is a difference there as well. So consciousness in one way or the other becomes part and parcel of the Indian psychological thinking or spiritual teaching, and therefore it comes into psychology as well. And then we talk about the person as the person who is the proponent of the sadhana, is that person then becomes the attainer of that altered state of consciousness through a systematic method of doing that, and therefore person also becomes important in that way. Okay. So now when we talk about the person as consciousness as such, it sounds a bit confusing. What are you talking about, consciousness as such? Think of it as pure consciousness. In fact, I should change it, otherwise it sometimes confuses people. So person is pure consciousness. Basically, the true identity, the true nature of any jiva is what? It is their Atma, which is their real self, and this ego self is just a kind of wrong interpretation of this experience of being a jiva. So we are pure consciousness, but then we take ourselves to be something else. And that misconception is because of the non-apprehension of the truth. I don't understand what this is in front of me. I think it looks like a snake. I mistake it for a snake, and I behave as if it is a snake, and then I run away. Non-apprehension of the root gives rise to the misapprehension of the snake. So now this consciousness, when we're talking about, is that consciousness which is the ultimate reality according to Advaita Vedanta, which is Kaivalya according to and Purusha according to Sankhya Yoga, and so on and so on. But consciousness as such is just pure consciousness. Just think of it as pure consciousness, and pure consciousness in its sublime state is knowledge of the self. So now we got equation between person is pure consciousness is knowledge of the self. So self-knowledge becomes the primary goal of many of the traditions, but in particular Advaita Vedanta talks about this self-knowledge, Atma Vidya or Brahma Vidya as the main goal, which has to be reached through the practices which we then have talked about. So pure consciousness, and it is then everything which is kind of rolled into one. And when we talk about the person, we are talking about pure consciousness, we are talking about the psychological dimension, the mental dimension, which is then cognition, emotion, and values, and all the intention and perception which is going on. Everything kind of bundled up together as is this individual who is then connected by the awareness to their real nature, which is pure consciousness. Okay. Nishant, you wanted to ask something?
No, I think you covered it.
I was just stretching out. Thank you. No.
What's that?
No. I was just you already said it. I was basically saying we don't know who we are.
Yeah.
And so we need to find out who we are, and in whatever way we can help the person that we're treating find out who they are, but in their own context.
In their own context. And knowing oneself again has got two dimensions. Okay? Knowing my true identity as Atma is different from self-awareness and knowing myself at the transactional level. Most of the time what we are talking about is become more aware of your thoughts, become aware of your feelings, become aware of your belief system, become aware of your attitudes towards various different things, become aware of where your intentions are coming from. Basically, become aware of your vasanas. That's we can put it in just one word. But certainly self-awareness in psychological terms, self-awareness is the key to mental health. Knowing myself, self-awareness is the key to one of the most important keys to mental health. And why is that? Is because the more I know about myself, the more I am kind of aware, I am able to regulate myself. So not only cognitive regulation in terms of my thinking process. Why? Because I'm self-aware. Emotional regulation. Why? Because I'm aware of all these emotions and the shades of emotion and all the different kinds of emotion which I am so much aware of. Then I can say, okay, this emotion I need to regulate in this way. So in other words, if I can have cognitive regulation, emotional regulation, behavioral regulation through self-awareness, then I will be much better off in terms of not only my mental health, but also my emotional intelligence as well. All these factors are coming into understanding the self through self-awareness. But then, when we take the spiritual dimension, that self-awareness will then go to becoming aware of our true nature, which is Brahman. So then it becomes slightly different. Now, in the existential embodied situation, however, the person finds himself conditioned. So I think we have talked about this conditioning, where this conditioning is what? Just give me 1 minute. There's somebody at the door. Sorry about that. So we have talked about this conditioning, right? So conditioned state in the embodied situation. And if you want to know about that, well, we have to look at ourselves and say, okay, I'm this person, and I've got all this conditioning which I'm carrying with me, not only from this life, but also from my previous lives as well. So this conditioning is not only related to this life, but also previous lives as well. And what happens is that the thinking is that, yeah, we are conditioned, and this conditioning is equal to avidya, non-apprehension of the truth. But it is not a condition which is not going to be reversible. It is reversible, and we can remedy that situation by spiritual means. So yes, we are conditioned, we are suffering because of this conditioning, but there is a solution to this suffering by reconditioning and deconditioning. Okay? So this is where I think I mentioned about from the conditioning to the reconditioning, and from the reconditioning to the deconditioned state of completely kind of going beyond our individual identity. So this is important to kind of understand as well. So it is possible to return to the completely unconditioned state, and some techniques can be used to help us to in the process of liberation from the condition to the totally unconditioned state. So we can see this connection now between consciousness, the person, and the person in a conditioned state reaching the unconditioned state, which is pure consciousness. And this is the whole pathway which we talk about when we talk about the kind of pathway of purification and perfection, and then finally liberation. So this unconditioned state is really the ultimate knowledge for transcending the conditioned state. So this unconditioned state is where we reach when we transcend the conditioned state. And as we were talking about, is that, the kind of way of understanding me as a person in this conditioned state, and knowing that my true nature is kind of hidden away for the time being because of all this, all the non-apprehension of the truth, which comes from various directions. But that conditioning is not allow me to experience myself as Brahman or Atma. And therefore, transcending this conditioned state is the primary goal, leading to the ultimate knowledge, leading to liberation. So the means of transcendence are through the practices of instruments of the body, mind, and intellect. This is the means to transcendence, is the instruments of the body and the mind and the intellect. So now you can see how all these things are connected. Pure consciousness is my true nature, this conditioned individual, me as a person, and me as a person having this body, mind, intellect, which is conditioned according to my past experience, my vasanas, and therefore to go back to my original nature of being the pure self, then I have to kind of use the practices related to the body and the mind and the intellect of my person, and then through that process I can come to understand who I truly am. So the implication of this distinction between the unconditioned and the conditioned state for the knowledge development, according to that, are as follows. So one thing is that, the human psychological condition is like a vortex of many different forces acting on and influencing the person. Okay? So when we think about what is going on in my mind at the moment, I'm being disturbed by somebody ringing the door. So the external influence is coming into my mind. When I'm teaching, I'm also kind of aware of the words which are flowing in my mind, and therefore kind of constituting a certain way of speaking about certain things. And therefore vortex from the outside, forces from the outside, forces from the inside, forces which are even subconscious or subliminal forces which are contributing to the kind of phenomena which are going on in my mind. These are all the kind of vortex of these forces coming together in the mind. And what Patanjali talks about is this vortex is a set of vrittis which is continuously kind of developing in the chitta of the person. Number two is to understand that conditioned person becomes an instrument of individualized thought, action, and passion. So this conditioned person not only has got such a kind of forces going on within themselves, but then when I am this conditioned person, the immediate consequence of that is that I become individualized, that I become an ego individual, an individual person who has got this thought, has got this action, who has got this passion, which we all experience on a daily basis, right? But the instruments are there. And then the third thing is that knowledge becomes relative, it becomes biased, happiness is personal, beauty is subjective. Now, all these things are related to, on the one hand, the non-apprehension of the truth. Secondly, it is related to me being the individual. Then I think that my body, my mind, my intellect, my sensations, my perceptions, my feelings, my happiness, my thinking processes, all this becomes individualized, and it becomes relative, and it becomes biased as well. So knowledge becomes relative and it becomes biased, and it is very much personalized in that sense as well. And then the knowing and the being become separate. So what we mean by this is that my sense of being, which is the truth about myself, and knowledge of that being becomes separate. Why? Because now my knowledge has become relative. So it is related to my body, my mind, my intellect, but not to the knowledge of being. So they become separate. My knowledge of Atma becomes separated from my knowledge of myself as a person. And this is again the consequence of being individualized in this kind of way. And values get divorced from actions. In other words, that my actions are determined maybe not by values, but my inclination and tendencies. So, in other words, the dharmic behavior may seem to be, we are moving away from that, because dharma is about the kind of moral, ethical dimension which we just talked about, and that gives me direction in which to, how to make my choices, and how my choices are related to my ultimate goal in life, and how can I just keep on going in that direction. So then the kind of fifth implication is that beautiful may not be valued, and value may not be acted upon. Known may not be true, and true may not be known. All these kind of things are happening simply because I am in that state of non-apprehension, avidya. And because of this avidya, all these things are coming together in my individuality and giving rise to all kinds of issues. Okay? So when I become biased, for example, because I am thinking about my own individual perspective, and I say to you, this is me, this is my truth, this is my perspective, and therefore that bias is coming because I have kind of owned a certain perspective and said this is my perspective. So it leads to many different kinds of issues because of this individualization. And a person can free oneself, which can happen in various degrees, shades and grades, and there are different halls and stages on the return path. So you remember I showed you the diagram of the return path, right? So we descend into individuality from the totality, and then from the individuality, we go back into the totality. Again, Advaita Vedanta way of thinking, but giving us an idea about what this journey is all about, is that we descend from totality into the individuality of being human. And being human, we undergo suffering, we want to return home, and therefore returning home means that I have to do these practices which lead to purity and perfection, and then ultimate liberation. And the ultimate purpose of life is to attain the unconditioned state of pure consciousness. Again, we come back to this idea of what is really the purpose and of human existence, according to Indian spirituality, is that I want to go back into my pure unconditioned state and leave this state of the personhood behind. So this ultimate unconditioned state of pure consciousness, this is Brahman, this is Atman. Okay? So now we can see how the Indian approach of thinking about the person. And we can see it is distinctly kind of different from the person in terms of Western psychology. And one way of understanding this is that Western psychology will not talk about self-realization. Western psychology talks about something else. Anybody remember what I told about? What does Western psychology talk about? Not about self-realization.
Based on the experimental science.
It talks about how your emotions control your actions, or how your actions are influenced by your emotions.
Yes. Okay, that is the case, and also the case is that there are various things going on in myself. What I was thinking about is that if anybody familiar with Abraham Maslow? What does Maslow talk about? He's an American psychologist.
Yeah, Maslow is the hierarchy of needs.
That's right.
You have a basic need, food, shelter, and then you have the higher level needs, including self-actualization.
That's right. So he talks about self-actualization. The top of the pyramid of Maslow, you reach a state of self-actualization. Now, self-actualization is a Western psychological concept which talks about potentiating your talents and skills, which means that your inner potential is actualized. So in Indian psychology, we talked about self-realization, not self-actualization, which are then two different concepts. So self-actualization takes you up to the top of your transactional dimension. Self-realization will transcend this self-actualization to take you to self-realization. So this is again another fundamental difference between Western psychology and Indian psychology. Nishat?
Yeah, so the irony to me is that, and this is a great concept, is the self-actualization is saying I'm putting all my efforts into this particular nasha, body, mind, this particular person, whereas we're saying you're not really that. You should be putting your efforts into what you really are.
Yes, absolutely right. And this is again a consequence of the non-apprehension. Okay, but of course, most of the people in Western world are not familiar with the transcendental dimension, and therefore it is much more of a kind of materialist culture, and therefore it's all about let me get whatever I can to the best of my ability, let me potentiate my skills and talents, let me kind of work very hard in order to achieve that kind of actualization of my relative self. But then, in the end, the question is, what is your framework of thinking? And if your framework of thinking is, well, this is the only life, and I've got on from birth to the end of my life, all I have got is this body, mind, intellect, and I have to do the best I can in order to get the best out of myself and my life. That becomes the kind of attitude. Ashok?
To add to what Nishatji says, or maybe a compliment, maybe thing is that I look at it that self-actualization could be a step in self-realization, that stopping at saying, okay, I'm satisfied, I believe that I'm contributing to community is thing, but what Hindu philosophy says is, fine, but what's next after that?
Yes, that's right. And sometimes I think that the two pathways are actually parallel processes, parallel but interconnected, in the sense that when I'm doing my kind of spiritual practices and I'm doing my sadhana, what am I doing? I'm clearing the clutter in my mind and in my heart, and that automatically brings me to a state of actualization, so that I can perform better, my efficiency goes up, my effectiveness goes up, and therefore whatever I want to achieve, I can achieve within a short time. Okay? So that then becomes like a parallel process of actualization going on at the same time while we are reaching out for the ultimate goal. Nishat?
Yeah, I agree with what Ashokji said. It's kind of like if I take it to, let's say, my children, right? I want them to be, if I look at self-actualized, reach your full potential, right? Become a doctor, right?
That's right.
I think what we're saying is, why become a doctor? Is it so that this BMI, have reached my full potential, or is it that I become an instrument of God to cure others?
That's the difference. That's right. And therefore, to actualize your potential puts you in a position whereby you can serve humanity. And that is another kind of idea which the Indian kind of tradition talk about, is that what are you here for? And if you already attained liberation, then you've got nothing to do. And Bhagavan Shri Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita is that you exist for other people. You become the instrument of the divine. And therefore, becoming the instrument of the divine, your sole purpose is to serve humanity. And we see many masters doing that, right? Serving humanity without any concern about any money or any recognition, nothing doing. So it can work both ways. I mean, it can be a stepping stone towards realization as well. Is that okay? Let me potentiate my actual, talents and everything else. But there is another step which I can then proceed to work. So I got the best of both worlds, in other words. Okay, Vishal?
Hari Bhattiji, just
Hari.
on the same chain of thought, which I think Nishaji and Ashokji was talking. So just like from the Indian psychology and the Indian spirituality perspective, because we have that Paravidya and Aparavidya concept, so
That's right. That's right.
So the highest, this, as you mentioned, the sole purpose is to serve, So it's not a kind of a denial of, because the Indian heritage has flourished into all the fields, so to
That's
say.
right. That's
It's
right. That's right.
so we have never denied, in terms of,
No,
materialistic, but I
that's
think
right.
at the contextually, as you mentioned, it is more from, evolution from the spiritual perspective. That's the
That's right.
highest, I guess.
That's right. That's right. So it doesn't deny that, you can become your best self. And of course, the pathways of purification and perfection is really that whatever you are, whatever you're doing in your life, you can attain that perfection in your own profession or whatever it is, because the very mental processes which we are kind of, dealing with, they become very, very refined. So for example, just take one example. Now I'm doing yoga practice, right? So my mind can be so refined, and it can focus on something over a long period of time without a break. So if I want to learn something, it'll take me 3 minutes. Whereas otherwise, if the mind is wandering, it may take me 10 minutes. So what does it mean? It means that efficiency has come about because of my spiritual practice. And therefore, if I'm a doctor, then I will be able to use all this, refinements of the mind and the body and the intellect as well, in order to even become a better doctor and to serve better as well. So all these are kind of, eventually related together. So when I was just mentioning, I thought I'd mentioned this before, but it is coming a bit later. So now we can think about these pathways of perfection. And this is the ego individual who is selfish and acting in a selfish way, who is in a state of ignorance and is taking, all kind of action which are based on this is me and this is mine. And then we make a transition to the seeker. And the seeker is one who is functioning selflessly, action with devotion and knowledge, and therefore action in inaction. So it is kind of stepping back. I'm not the doer, but the action is going on. So I, as a doer, I'm not the doer, is inaction. Whereas when I take the action in that state of consciousness, then it becomes selfless action, because I'm not the doer, but I'm doing something for the sake of doing it, because it is something which is required of me in my role and my function. So then we go to the person of perfection, who is actionlessness, established in the truth completely. And therefore it becomes inaction in action. And because now the kind of focus has shifted from the action to the inaction, which is the true self. And when I'm located in the true self, then that is a primary experience, and the action becomes a secondary kind of experience. Now, this is the path of purification through action, knowledge, and devotion. You can recognize the path of Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga. And from the purification through absorption and meditation, we can attain this perfection. So now you can see how the person is related to the ego individual through the spiritual practices, begins to have this purification through action, knowledge, devotion, and ultimately realizing the self will be able to, through absorption and meditation, attain that highest knowledge about oneself. Okay? And this is all done in the spirit of sacrifice, as it talks about in the Bhagavad Gita. And also that, this is another way I was thinking that I had shown this slide, but not yet. So in according to Advaita Vedanta, then we have got the absolute Brahman, the unmanifest Purusha, who is described as imperishable, indefinable, unmanifest, unthinkable, unchangeable, eternal. Then with the effect of Maya, which then reflects back into the creation of the whole universe. So that becomes the cosmic Ishvara, Saguna Brahman. This is Nirguna Brahman turning into Saguna Brahman through the process of Maya, through the effect of Maya, which then manifests as Prakriti, which is Vibhuti. Vibhuti is the one in all, and Vishvarupa is all in one. And this concept is then related also to the Avtara. Individual Avtara is a special Purusha coming down as an Avatar in Saguna form, related to the Nirguna form in its purest form, to create a change in humanity. Okay? Whenever there is problem, Bhagavan comes down to fix a problem and say, okay, now I'm here to fix the problem. And I take birth again and again to remedy this situation of adharma. When the balance of adharma has gone very high, he will manifest to remedy the situation. So manifestation is Bhagavan, Vishnu, Shiva, Brahma, and therefore that is at the individual level. And then we got the personal Jiva, who's also a manifestation of Brahman, but he doesn't know it. Manifest Jiva, Jiva is the doer and the enjoyer. And therefore we descend into the Prakriti, into humanity. One comes as an avatar or into the personal Jiva, and then the journey back to the unmanifest is by my sadhana, ascent into Godhood, in the self, descent into Prakriti, Jiva's imperfection, and ascent into Godhood, Jiva's perfection. So this is how Advaita Vedanta kind of talks about this whole journey, together with the various levels of manifestation, including the Jiva who is coming into this conditioned state and therefore begins to suffer because identifies themselves as the Jiva, doer and enjoyer. And therefore there is a reverse direction to take into the Brahmanhood, as it were, from the personhood. And this is all to do with the Jiva's perfection through Jiva sadhana. So this is a way of understanding. Even in the three dosha system, we can think about, the individual person. So the individual person in that case is made up of the elements combining together to give you the dosha, and this dosha then is a kind of, the attribute of Prakriti, and it shows what happens when the Vata dosha is in balance or it is in imbalance, and so on and so on. And there is a whole kind of conceptualization of personality coming from this dosha model, which shows you that a combination of these doshas will make up a certain type of personality. So this is another way of thinking about person and personality as well. And you can see if it is a kapha person, which consists of the water and the earth element, is likely to be generous, kind, strategic, patient. But at the same time, it goes into imbalance, will become stubborn, will get depressed, melancholic, will hold a grudge, will feel stuck. So the whole concept of Ayurveda is balance, imbalance. When things are balanced, things run smoothly. When things go out of balance for whatever reason, then we experience the negative effects of the dosha. Okay, let's just stop here for the time being. Have a break of about 15 minutes, then we come back again.
Can we, Hariom, Dr. Patnaji, can you switch back to the previous slide while we're on the break? Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
I had a question, Patniji. Do you want me to ask?
Hariom. Yes.
So my question was, in Western thought, psychology is a more social science. Medicine is more of based on basic sciences, and other than in the field of psychiatry, which sort of looks at both, and there is an acceptance that there is chemical treatments to treat emotional aspects. So in Indian psychology, what is Ayurveda? Is Ayurveda a medical science, or you really cannot differentiate Ayurveda from Indian philosophy. It's a part of Indian philosophy, so it's just a different way of looking at Vedantic philosophy thing. In other words, what's the differentiation, if there is any?
Yeah, so, but the differentiation is there, but also the connection is there in the sense that Ayurveda is part of the Vedic knowledge system. In other words, it's part and parcel of the Vedic way of thinking. That's why it is called the science of life. And the connection between spirituality and Ayurveda is that Ayurveda has got this concept that life needs to be balanced in the first place, and it needs to be prolonged as long as possible, so that this science of life, Ayush means the life, and Veda means the science of life, is there for extending and balancing life as much as possible. Why? The question is, why should we extend life? Okay, and the whole purpose is that if I am going to be on my spiritual path trying to attain my moksha, then I need all the time I can get. Okay, and the thinking behind that is not only that the mind becomes balanced and therefore your sadhana becomes better, your body becomes very fit, and therefore it can last for a long time, and then we've got a maximum chance created by Ayurvedic thinking and treatment, which will allow you to do it says that, what called Charaka says that the dharma and the artha and the kama are going to be much more possible when the life is extended. And if you have got dharma, artha and kama, then moksha will definitely follow. So it is within the context of the larger framework of spirituality and spiritual attainment that the Ayurveda also sits there. In fact, even astrology sits somewhere there as well, because Jyotish Shastra is also another way of giving us self-knowledge. And the self-knowledge which astrology was supposed to give us was that this is going to be your prarabdha karma. Okay, this is how you are going to experience life when you go through this, cycles of the planets and all the sub-cycles and whatever is happening in transition of your life. Then be prepared, because this is what's going to happen. And therefore, the astrological advice was, on the one hand, yes, do this puja and do this and wear this mala and so on, but really it was psychological counseling through the astrological chart to prepare the person for the unfolding karma which was to come. So it is also a kind of science which was related to spirituality as well. So this is a good question in the sense that where does Ayurveda sit in the whole kind of conceptualization of the Indian systems of knowledge? It does sit in a place where it is able to prolong life for the sake of spiritual enlightenment. Okay, does it make sense? Good. Okay. So we got several questions. Now, one suggestion is that we hold fire and we kind of ask the question in the next session. But I'm sure some of you are now, kind of wondering whether they can have an immediate, which is fine as well. I mean, I'm happy to work either way. But sometimes, it kind of breaks the flow of the class. But it's okay. Let's answer your questions, and then in the future, if we can try to hold it for the next session, that would be fine as well. The other option is that we can have 20 minutes at the start and maybe another 20 minutes at the end. But again, that is kind of taking time out of our study. So let's think about it. Nishit, you wanted to ask, and then Vishal and somebody else was there as well.
My question was very quick. On this slide about Ayurveda, my question is, it's showing balance and imbalance. My question was more on an Ayurvedic sense, these elements of fire, water, earth. Is that balance attained by providing some kind of herbal medicines and things like that, or
yes. Yeah, it is a much more holistic approach, in the sense that, you know, the doctor will ask, okay, where are you living at the moment? What is your natural environment in which you are living? How is that affecting your own prakriti? What are you doing that is making this to be imbalanced? Are you eating the wrong kind of food? And therefore, to balance the lifestyle, balance the diet, balance their kind of working in their own kind of environment, it is a kind of holistic approach.
Okay, thank you.
And that will begin to take us towards the balancing. Okay. Vishal, you still got a question?
Yeah, Hari Bandiji, yes. I can hold till I think next time, or perhaps if you get time.
Okay. Yeah, but just make a note of it so that, you know,
Yeah,
you
sure.
can ask me in the next session.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are talking about, you know, the various ways of thinking about a person, and I haven't gone into much detail about the personality, because there are various models of personality. Like this is one model, Tridosha model is another way of thinking about personality. And then we got the Guna model, which also talks about how can you think about your own gunas and how are they balanced between Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. In fact, there is a Guna inventory questionnaire. If you fill it and mark it, you can get your score as to what is your proportion of your Sattva, the proportion of your Rajas, the proportion of your Tamas. So you can get hold of it online. A few places where that is available. Okay, so coming back to now the ideas about consciousness and mind. So we kind of come back to this important ideas about consciousness and mind, and therefore the distinction between consciousness and mind, right? So we make a distinction between the mind and the brain, which Descartes did in the 18th, 17th century, and therefore the split between mind is not brain and brain is different from the mind, the physical is different from the mental, and this dichotomy between the mind and the body has kind of taken Western psychology in one direction. But really that is one distinction. The fundamental distinction is, of course, between the consciousness and the mind, and in particular the awareness in the mind. So we got awareness, we got consciousness, how are they related, and we make a fundamental difference between consciousness as such, pure consciousness, and awareness in the mind, which is also consciousness, but we talk about it as awareness in the relative sense. So consciousness is the knowledge side of the universe. It is a ground condition for all awareness. In other words, that consciousness is equated to, if we are talking about infinite, ultimate consciousness, and we know that consciousness is related to knowledge, because it is the revealer of knowledge. So if you got infinite consciousness, it is making the whole knowledge side of the universe available at that level of consciousness. So it is also the ground condition for all awareness. In other words, all awareness within humanity, within any creature throughout the universe, is said to be going to be related to the consciousness and awareness. So consciousness is not part or aspect of the mind, which, unlike awareness, is physical. So remember, awareness has got this very kind of subtle presence in the mind. Now the question is the reflection also physical? Because when you're talking about awareness, right, it is in the mind, in the antakarna, or in the buddhi. Now buddhi itself is a material thing, so is awareness which is in the buddhi is also material, right? So unlike awareness, consciousness has got nothing to do with the mind. In fact, according to Advaita Vedanta and other traditions of yoga and Sankhya, the Purusha or the Brahman is nothing to do with body, mind, intellect, right? So the reflection is what is available to us as a reflection of this consciousness in the buddhi, and that is considered physical as well. Consciousness does not interact with the mind or other objects or processes directly of the physical universe. In association with consciousness, mental phenomena become aware, and we become revealed by the awareness in the mind, the mental phenomena become available to us. We become aware of the mental phenomena, but at the same time, there is a subjectiveness which is also associated with consciousness in association with buddhi. So, I don't know whether I've talked about the evolutes of Prakriti. So, Mahat comes first, which is a cosmic intelligence. That cosmic intelligence then evolves into the individual buddhi. And that individual buddhi then evolves into the ahankara, which is this subjectivity of the individual. So that I amness comes also as part and parcel of this kind of cascading down of that awareness, right, intelligence, right down to the physical level. So these mental phenomena are there, but they get revealed to us because this consciousness is imparting this illuminating light in the buddhi. Then the mind is the interfacing instrumentality that faces consciousness on the one side and the physical part on the other side, and the physical world as well. So we got the physical part of the mind, we got the physical part of the external world, and the mind becomes the chief instrument, the instrument which is interfacing the transcendental and the transactional. It sits in the middle, as it were. Why? Because consciousness, pure consciousness, is being reflected in the buddhi. And that is the connection of the transcendental to the transactional awareness. And therefore, if you see, most of the tradition will go to the point of making you just in that meditation of I amness. For example, Patanjali talks about asmita samadhi, just focusing on the awareness in itself, rather than awareness focusing on other things. So awareness, when it is focused on in itself without reference to anything else, becomes asmita samadhi. In Advaita Vedanta, we talk about the witnessing consciousness. Okay? So if you see Drik Drishya Viveka, in that, Shankaracharya is talking about, well, my eye is the seer of the object. The mind is the seer of the eye, and the self is the seer of the mind. So this kind of hierarchical sense of witnessing something is also there in that sense in Advaita Vedanta as well. Thus the mind gives the impression of having two faces. One face turned towards the physical side and the other one facing the consciousness of the spirit side. Normally what happens is that we are too busy with the physical systems and the physical side that we don't even think about that there is another dimension which my mind can go towards. And therefore, we kind of get caught up in the transactional world rather than looking at the transcendental world. So from the physical side, the mind collects information by processing its input, this normal cognitive processing, and then if we see this kind of relationship between the Atman, pure consciousness, and the mind, the reflected consciousness in the mind experiences awareness and self-awareness. Awareness leads to the awareness of cognitive processes, thoughts, feelings, and sensations. So then we got this kind of connection, body-mind connection, where we got the senses and the objects. So the brown circle in the middle is the body. The mind extends beyond the body, and pure consciousness infinitely extending beyond just the mind and beyond the body. But there is a connection between the body and the mind. This body-mind connection, senses and objects as well, together with the connection with the pure consciousness as well. So you see the orange arrows are really the reflection of pure consciousness in the buddhi, which gives rise to awareness and self-awareness, that I'm aware, but I'm also aware that I exist. So existence and consciousness is reflected in the buddhi as I am and I exist. Sat and Chit. Sat and Chit is reflected in me right now as awareness that I'm aware that I'm talking away, and the sense of the self that I am the one who is talking. So if you think about Sat, Chit and Anand, the Sat and the Chit is very much present at the moment in all of us. And if you recognize that this awareness is what we are talking about in terms of the awareness, reflected consciousness, and this self-awareness is my ahankara, which is also part and parcel of my the evolutive prakriti at this level, then we recognize that Brahman is not somewhere out there. Brahman is here now, being reflected in my own buddhi. So this is the way we can understand these connections between consciousness and the mind and the body, and the body and the outer world. So when the information is therefore processed, is exposed to awareness at the other end, that is when the light of consciousness reflected on it, there is a conscious experience of the phenomenal experience and the phenomenal data. In other words, I'm looking at my laptop, that information is reaching the buddhi, and that buddhi, because it is reflecting this awareness, so I am conscious that I'm looking at my laptop. This becomes now my conscious experience of this phenomenal data of the laptop coming through my eyes, processed through the mind, going to the buddhi. Buddhi, being enlightened, will then reveal to me what I'm looking at. Instantaneously, this is happening. Now, in a reflexive situation where the reflection of consciousness reflects back in consciousness, pratibimba, one has subjective awareness. So, which means this bimba pratibimba theory, whereby it says this is the pratibimba and this is now being reflected as this bimba, then that becomes my subjective experience, awareness, and the mind, though physical like the brain, is different from it. So there is a very clear differentiation between the mind and consciousness. So it influences and is influenced by events in the brain. So again, we're taking into account the physical part of our mind, which in a gross sense is the brain. In the subtle sense, it is the mind and the intellect. And then in most Indian tradition, they assert that mind is comprised of very subtle matters, forms of matter, than even the brain. And consequently, it has different characteristics such as non-locality. So if you think about non-locality, what is that? Is that the mind is non-local. What does it mean? Oh, mind can be non-local.
I think, sitting where we are, mind can even travel to the moon.
That's right. That's right.
In a flash.
That's right. That's right. So it's not localized in the head here. It can travel around the world in 8 milliseconds. It can go around the world and come back here into my head. So that's why I said non-locality. And then the subtler character makes it possible to receive the light of consciousness and the spirit to reflect its contents. In other words, that this mind is very, very subtle material which is able to reflect. Just like, if you got just a glass, then it will not reflect. But if you put the silver behind the glass, which then has got the ability to reflect, then becomes a reflecting mirror. So the material of which the mind is made then becomes like that silver behind the glass, and therefore it has got the capacity to reflect. By virtue of its implicit non-local nature, it is possible for the mind to act on systems beyond the body-mind complex with which it is associated. So, how can I sit here and my mind is non-local at the moment, and it has gone beyond my system, beyond the body-mind complex with which it is associated. It is going through all this kind of non-local systems which you are now connected to, and therefore I am in your room with you at the moment. Or my mind is projected into your room. How? Because you can hear me, you can see me, you can hear the sounds which I'm making, right? And the words which I'm speaking. it is as if I'm present there. Now think about, before technology was invented, before the telephone was invented, you had to pass message by writing it down and then sending it. Or even before that, if you go even right back, there was no way of kind of communicating with somebody without the writing being there, without the capacity for writing something down, the symbolic language which was there. Even before that time, there was no way in which I could be present with somebody else at a distance. But here it is becoming more and more possible through the virtual reality, which is also going to be non-local. So the non-locality of the mind connected to the non-locality of the Wi-Fi system makes me available to anybody right across the globe. Now, such a conception of the mind leaves open the possibility that the mind may survive the destruction and cessation of that associated with a body at a given time. So, well, it is not a very strong argument, but it is a weak argument in the sense that if mind can go all over the place, how is it that it needs to remain here? If the body dies, then that subtler matter might kind of be able to travel into other realms, non-local realms, and therefore it is possible that the mind will survive the destruction and cessation of the associated body at a given time. Now, in terms of, say, Advaita Vedanta, we talk about the Sharira Traya, Sthula Sharira, Sukshma Sharira, and Karan Sharira. And what is talked about is that the Sthula Sharira separates out from the Sukshma and the Karan Sharira, and the Karan Sharira becomes the traveling spirit, as it were. And it inhabits another body, which is just about to start its journey in life. And then it starts kind of accompanying that body up to the point where it forgets about its past life and then comes into another existence. So it is talked about in that kind of manner. So the possibility of existing beyond the destruction of the body, that is entirely possible. And it, of course, we know that, the cycle of rebirth, cycle of birth and death, and the kind of rebirth which takes place because of the load of the karma which is there, that is all connected with this mind able to survive beyond the body. Okay, so most Indian tradition assert that the mind is comprised of very subtle matter, enjoys a dual citizenship in the physical world as well as in the realm of consciousness. So, dual citizens. Some countries allow for us to be citizens of one nation and also to be citizen of another nation. So now that dual citizenship also we can consider about the mind, which belongs to the physical world as well as the realm of consciousness. And in the material form, mind citizenship is in the material world, is by birth, as it were. So we are born in the material world. Okay, so a natural citizenship is in the transactional world, in this world in which we are born. Then, when we want to become the citizen of the transcendental world, naturalization of the domain of consciousness spirit is a matter of choice and an outcome of significant effort. Okay, so if you are an Indian subject, or I am a UK subject, and I want to attain, US citizenship or Canadian citizenship or Indian citizenship, then there is a whole process, very hard work. I have to work very hard. So I might have to live here for 5 years and earn some money and pay my taxes and work hard to do all that. So at the end of 5 years, then the country will say, okay, now you can apply for citizenship because you made all this effort, you created some kind of revenue for the government, and therefore you can now become citizen. Similarly, if I want to inhabit or to become one with my transcendental realm of existence, then I have to make a lot of effort. What is that effort? My sadhana. Through my significant effort, my sadhana, I can transcend this material realm to go to that which is the transcendental realm. Its citizenship in the material realm bestows on it the right to process information through its sensory channel and neural connection, and the mind has involuntary and passive access to consciousness. This is what we are talking about, the reflection in the buddhi. So it has got this passive access to consciousness, which is now involuntary. I can't control it. It is available to me. In that light of consciousness shines, illumine the critically poised contents, which become subjectively revealed to me. So there is a connection between the transcendental and the material, as we have talked about before, and the connection is the mind, and in particular the mind as far as the awareness is concerned. The mind also has within its reach the possibility of partaking in consciousness as such by disciplined practice, so that it may have direct, unmediated knowledge. Okay? Unmediated knowledge is that paroksha anubhuti, and that kind of way of knowing the truth without any mediation of any of the instruments of the body, mind, intellect. Unmediated knowledge is possible by disciplined practice. And this kind of mediated knowledge we are used to, right? All this is happening right now is coming through my laptop, coming through my senses, coming to my mind, coming to my intellect, and it is all mediated. This knowledge of my laptop is mediated in that process of a chain of processes functioning in my sensory equipment, in my mind, in my intellect, and making me have the knowledge of the Lord. Whereas when we talk about unmediated knowledge, no mediation is required because it is self-knowledge. It is subjective knowledge, not objective knowledge. Objective knowledge requires instrumentality, that we need to have certain instrument in order to process this knowledge, to know something, whereas subjective knowledge doesn't require any kind of mediation. So the possibility is otherwise remote because the mind's habitual involvement with the sensory and the cortical processes, cognitive processes, this makes it kind of difficult for us to have this unmediated knowledge. It requires a lot of effort, right? Because we are so busy being busy with all the affairs of our transactional life that, mind is so preoccupied with just the experience of life and living and making effort for sustaining life that there is kind of little chance that we are even going to make effort towards kind of acquiring the citizenship of the transcendental. So in the dual role of the mind, two distinct processes are taking place, the cognitive and the transcognitive, which help the mind to play this dual role, two distinct processes. Okay. So when we talk about cognitive, we are talking about, say, for example, the differentiation between savikalpa samadhi and nirvikalpa samadhi. Savikalpa samadhi is a cognitive process and a cognitive samadhi. Nirvikalpa samadhi is non-cognitive, transcognitive samadhi, which means it's gone beyond even the cognitive processes, because it is now doesn't require any cognitive processing to take place in order to attain the knowledge of the self. The former involves sensory motor processes, while the transpersonal processes involve accessing consciousness and achieving a pure state of the mind through normal cognitive processes. Consciousness is reflected in the mind. In other words, when I sit down in meditation, I have got this mind which is capable of being disciplined to the extent that I can leave the mind behind. Okay? Through the mind to beyond the mind. And when I say through the mind, it is through the practice of dharana, dhyana, vitarka samadhi, vichara samadhi, ananda samadhi, asmita samadhi, and then nirvikalpa samadhi. All that is kind of related to the mind functioning right up to the savikalpa samadhi. Nirvikalpa samadhi, mind is not required. It is as if the mind will be merged into that consciousness. Okay, so now awareness consists in all those reflection, transcognitive processes. Consciousness is realized in the mind, mind is absorbed in consciousness, and awareness in such a state consists of a relationship of identity with consciousness. So knowing Brahman, we become Brahman. This is a saying in Advaita Vedanta, right? The knower of Brahman becomes Brahman. And this is because the direct identification through unmediated knowledge, I then become Brahman because I know Brahman in the most subjective manner which is available to me in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. So now we can see the relationship between mind and consciousness with all these things which are going on. It is a complex process which is going on, and so one of the things which we can now talk about just briefly before we finish is that the main concern of Western psychology in general is that the normal processes of the mind, right? So in Western psychology, we talk about, sensory processes, cognitive processes, emotional regulation, and the motivational processes, whatever is going on. Everything is in this on the brain. The spotlight is on the brain with all these processes taking place, which gives us the information. And then observational techniques from the third person perspective are appropriately employed to study mental phenomena. So what do we mean by the third person perspective? Is the third person, in other words, it's not me. It's not me talking about the relation by my experience. It is a person who is sitting in front of me is talking about their experience, and that is called the third person perspective. They are thinking this, they are doing this, they are doing that, and so on. So there is the first person perspective, second person perspective, and third person perspective. So the observational techniques in Western psychology are related to third person. You stand back and you observe. And those observations then become your data for your research. Whereas in Indian psychology, we are going to be using the first person data, which means what is my experience, what is happening in my experience in terms of the body, the mind, the intellect, and this is indeed what is reflected in all the scriptures. Patanjali talks about all these inner processes because he has studied these processes by direct observation of his own mind. Okay, and that is called first person perspective, where I am the observer of my own inner processes, my own experience. So the physical paradigm of the mind functioning in a mechanical universe from the Western psychological point of view, the consequence is this idea that it is the brain and we can reduce everything to the brain. It is a physical process. There is nothing beyond the physical process. And when we talk about the mind, it is still related to the brain, because somewhere in the brain there is this consciousness which is being created through the phenomena of the brain. The processes which are going on in the brain. So the mind's functions are assumed to be best understood by identifying the correlated brain state. Significant shortcoming of this include pure consciousness is routinely ignored. Don't talk to me about pure consciousness. You take that to your spiritual class. Well, you only tell me about the brain and the brain states and the states of the mind. So pure consciousness is ignored. Higher states of consciousness generally remain outside the scope of consciousness studies. And then we got the interest in studying consciousness confined to the theoretical side, with little appreciation of practical implication of developing these higher states of awareness. So in other words, some of these things are pushed away by Western psychologists because on the one hand, it doesn't apply to their materialistic paradigm, and therefore it doesn't kind of quite connect with what they are doing, and therefore they kind of say, no, this is not what I deal with. But as I was saying that, there is more interest now in transpersonal psychology, which means that people are interested in knowing what is beyond the person, transpersonal. And therefore, things like consciousness studies, all these things begin to come into the realm of transpersonal studies. So it's not that this is completely true. There are kind of pockets of Western psychology which are talking about these kind of things. So the goal has been maintaining normality rather than seeking to transcend it. Now, interestingly, this applies to everything, including mental health, is that we think about how can I adjust my mind, adjust my emotion, how can I adjust all these things in order to attain normality of functioning. Whereas Indian psychology says that, there is a state beyond the normal state of consciousness, which is transcendental state. And therefore that can actually be the one which needs to be aimed for. It is not about normalizing your, existence in terms of your mental processes, but there is also the possibility of transcending the mind altogether. Okay, so some very purist Advaita Vedantins will say, don't talk to me about the mind. I'm not interested in the mind. For me, mind does not exist, so don't talk about the mind. I will only talk about Brahman. I will only talk about Atman. That's all. So they dismiss all this Indian psychology. No, it's all about you. You can teach that. That's fine. But it's not for me. These are very purist Advaita Vedantis. They don't kind of come down to, meditation can help you deal with your stress. And meditation can do this to your mind. They're saying, why you kind of fiddling around with the mind? As an Advaita Vedantin, I'm saying mind does not exist. Why are you talking about the mind? Anyway, that is a purist kind of way of thinking. But certainly, there are people who have begun to think about consciousness in the Western psychology as well. Okay, so I think we will just stop here, because then we're coming to the next session, which is then going to summarize all the main principles of Indian psychology, so that you can at a glance know what these principles are. Nishad? You want to ask a question?
Sorry, I had to get off mute.
Okay.
One thing I think happens, and it was hard for me many years ago when I started a Chinmay mission, is when we say mind in our Hindu context versus mind in the Western context, or people that aren't extremely spiritual, they think of mind as the brain, the thoughts and all that. Whereas ours is obviously a very subjective. It's actually, the mind is actually not a physical thing, meaning a jada or inert thing. And I think that is, I'm just calling it out as a challenge that we have to keep in mind.
Yes.
Pardon the pun.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, it is challenging to many people to think of the mind in this kind of different way, right? So that we normally, even, being brought up in the West, people then kind of turn more and more towards, mind, physical stuff, brain is the processor, and therefore, don't think about the mind anything further than that. But when we start talking about the mind as we have been talking, it gives you a completely different idea about what the mind is. And especially this idea of dual citizenship of the mind, right? That doesn't come into the kind of contextualization of the brain and mind within Western way of thinking and Western kind of system of psychology. Good. Okay. So I think we will just stop here for the time being, and then we can, if somebody would like to just say the closing prayers, we can then conclude the session. Anybody would like to say the closing prayers, please?
I'll do it.
I can do that. No, go ahead, please. Sorry.
पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः हरिः ॐ श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः हरिः ॐ.
Thank you very much, Hari Om, and see you next week. And we will extend the date of the assignment, and then next week just write down all your questions again so that we can start the session with all your questions. Thank you very much. Hari Om.
Thank you.
Hari Om.
Hari Om.